Welcome to Read to Succeed, with today a special guest is international negotiator Christine McKay. She's agreed to share with us details of one book that she's read that has been truly influential on her life. Let's talk to her now and find out what exactly is that book, what is it about, and why has it been so influential on her. All right, well, thank you so much, Christine, for agreeing to stay on and doing a little segment on Read to Succeed. Now, I understand that you might have a book that you'd like to share with us. So if you'd like to go ahead and tell us about that book.
Sure. So one of my favorite authors is Malcolm Gladwell, and I loved his book, Talking with Strangers, which was released a couple of years ago. I think it was in 2019, and it was my top book of 2019. And what I loved about it was how he has this great story at the beginning of the book that talks about Neville Chamberlain meeting Hitler. And right. Chamberlain was the only leader to ever meet Hitler in the Western world, to ever meet Hitler in person. And every time Chamberlain came back, Chamberlain was like, it's okay, he's not going to do anything, And so what the book does is it explores kind of how human nature actually wants to default to seeing the good in people. Yeah. And in my line of work as a negotiator, and I tend to approach my negotiations with from a trusting perspective and an openness and a transparency. It was amazing to me to read the various stories in that book of how that can fail me and when it can benefit me. And so I loved that book because it allowed me to think about how I approach things in a different way. It doesn't change necessarily how I approach it, but it does give me a different lens to think through. If I see a behavior that is like, wait a minute, I don't ignore that behavior. It's like, pay attention to that, explore that, ask some questions around that behavior to see if that's a trigger, or is that an issue? Is that something that's pervasive, or is that just something that was, something small? But it just gave me permission to kind of have a different kind of conversation in my negotiations and in my personal world that I hadn't really thought about.
So. That sounds an interesting book. It's not one I've read, and it kind of sounds familiar, but I'm not sure that I've really heard about it. So it sounds interesting. I'm a bit of a World War II buff as well. So what you said about Neville Chamberlain too. I mean, he really did not come out of that looking too good in the end.
No.
So that would be interesting to read about that in the book.
Yeah, it's good. I mean, he talks about judges will pass when they meet somebody, they will give a more lenient sentence in a lot of cases than they will if they haven't met them. And so it just explores this concept around how we really do want to see the good in people. Yeah. But sometimes we can get blinded by it.
We can get tripped up by it. But I mean, imagine if it was the other way around, and we forever saw the negative in people. I mean, if I had to choose, I'd much rather start from the standpoint of seeing the people from the positive than inherently from the negative.
Yeah, and he goes into that. I mean, at the end of the day, people are generally good. We behave in a way that, we operate out of what we think is the right thing to do at that moment in time. And, sometimes the outcomes of those decisions are not necessarily optimal. But most people do tend to operate from what they believe is a right place. Yeah. And whether that's actually ends up being true or not, I mean, that sometimes that's in the eyes of the beholder. But it was a really good book. It was really powerful. And I mean, I think all of Malcolm Gladwell's books are absolutely amazing. He has a new one coming out. I can't wait to read it. And so he's definitely one of my favorite authors. You cannot go wrong with any of his books. So.
Wow. Well, he's not an author I've read of any of his books, so I'll have to do that. That's the only thing with doing this little podcast is I've now got a whole heap of books to read, so, which is good. I like reading, but I don't spend enough time reading though. And now my final question for you is, what style of reading do you prefer? Like, do you do, or listening, do you do audio book? Do you do, paperback / hardcover book? Or do you use a Kindle? Or, what's your preference?
Yes, and yes. So I usually have 3 books going at the same time. one on audio, which I listen to when I'm walking around town or when I'm driving.
Yeah.
I have a Kindle that I'll read in the morning, and
Yeah.
then I have a physical book that I read in the evening before I go to bed.
Okay, well, you've got to talk me through that now. You've intrigued me. So I get the audio books. You're walking around.
Yep.
Okay. Now, what's the difference with the Kindle and then the book at night? Is there a particular type of book that you read on a Kindle versus the one at night? Tell me a little bit about that. How does that all work?
So I'm not a huge fiction reader as a general rule.
Yeah.
But if I'm reading fiction, I usually have a physical book and I read it in the evening. I don't like to use, I don't like to have my electronics a certain amount
Yeah.
of time before I go to bed. So I
Okay.
just would rather read the physical book. But in
Yeah.
the morning, I have a kind of a little booth that my husband built during the pandemic, which is like loaded with lights. And so it's just easier for me to read on the Kindle when I'm doing, and those books tend to be a lot more business oriented books, and I do notations on them and stuff like that. So that's why I have the two different kinds. There's something about reading fiction, having it in my hand, that I prefer, whereas a business book or a self-help book or something like that, I was more sterile, I guess is the word I come. So I don't need to have the intimacy with it, but a
Yeah.
fiction book is a much more intimate read for
Right.
me. Yeah.
And in terms of your reading, do you do it every day or just kind of when you feel like it? And with your business reading, is that a regimented thing that you do? Like, do you have set times every day that you do it?
I read every day. I
Wow.
love to read. I love reading. So I usually read. I'm a very early riser. I'm usually at my desk by 4:30 in the morning,
Wow.
and I get up around 4. I love the morning time, and I do a gratitude journal that I do in the morning, and then I have a half an hour to an hour that I read. It depends on the book that I'm reading, and then I also write. So then I have a time when I'm writing too. That's my
Right.
most creative time of the day. So
So that's in the early hours
yeah, in the
before that.
early
So
hours.
I have to ask then, what time do you go to bed if you're getting up at that time in the morning?
I usually go to bed around 9.
Right.
Sometimes, the other day I was up at 3 a.m. But I usually go to bed, try to go to bed at 9. So
Right.
I get 7 hours. So
Right. Oh,
that's
that's
good.
okay. It's
That's
not
a
so bad.
decent amount of sleep. Yeah.
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 And how
So.
about your husband? Does he get up at that time or he sleeps through and you you have some quiet time on your own?
No, he does not. He's not an early riser. Although he actually is annoyed as a result of the pandemic, right? Because I get up so early. He's now waking up at 5:30, and he's used to
Yeah.
waking up at 7. And he's like, I'm really sick of this 5:30 thing. So now he's at his desk by 7 when he used to not be at his desk until 9. So
Right.
it's
Right.
like he's gone through a bit of a change as a result of having me up so early.
Right.
But we live in a loft, a big loft, and so it's an open space. So it's very
Right.
hard to, for me to be, like our bedroom and our living room, everything's like all right there. So
Yeah.
it's when I wake up, it's not like I can close the door and have him
Yeah.
not wake up. So
Right. Right. Oh, we just got to work through that one.
yeah, that's why he built me a booth so that
Right.
I can come in and I can have a little door that I can shut. So
Right. Right. Have your quiet time on your own.
right, exactly. So.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Christine. Really appreciate you both participating in Insights into Success and Read to Succeed. So thank you for your contribution. And I've got another book to add to my list. So thank you for that. I need to be reading more frequently now.
Awesome. Well, it's an honor to be here. Thank you so much. Great to meet you. I love your shows. I love what you're doing. So thank
Thank
you for
you.
doing that. And everyone is going to love. I can't wait to introduce you to my network. So.
Cool. Oh, well, thank you very much.